Welcome to the Hennessy's house with me, your host, Nicole Hennessy. Today we're talking with Bobby, better known as the Glitter Dad on social media. He is an inspiring, awesome guy, and I'm so excited to share his story with you today. He grew up in a small, conservative town where being gay was something you didn't see or talk about. He had to overcome a lot of hardships, and life could have turned out pretty ugly for him if he didn't fight for himself. But now he's happily married at 39 with two kids he adopted out of the foster care system. So grab a cup of coffee and listen in as he tells us all about his journey, and we can be inspired.
I grew up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, a very small town, and one that you could kind of consider conservative. Well, I was that little boy who liked to play with Barbies. I liked to play with dolls. My hometown, it was a hockey town. So if you were a boy, you played hockey, and if you were a girl, you were a figure skater. And I wanted to be a figure skater, and at the time that was just very unheard of. And it took a lot of convincing from my mom and my dad to actually let me figure skate. And I ended up figure skating competitively for 11 years after that, and I just absolutely loved it. And my parents had a choice in that moment that they could have forced me to play a game that I didn't want to play, or allow me to do something that I really enjoyed. And when I was in middle school and high school, that's when I really started getting bullying towards me. And I was that kid that people pushed into lockers and knocked books out of my hands and wrote the word fag on a piece of paper and taped it to my backpack. But through my school days, I was so terrified to come out. It just wasn't a thing. I graduated in 1999. Visibility was just coming out. We were just starting to see gay folks in a positive light at that time, with Ellen coming out, and Will and Grace had just premiered. So we were just now starting to see positive images of gay folks on TV.
Did at any point in that you think to yourself, like, this isn't worth it?
For me, I was never in a spot where I would stop and say, I don't want to do this anymore because I'm getting teased. I loved figure skating. I loved being in the spotlight. I wore sequin outfits, and it was just something I really enjoyed. And I was on the front page of the newspaper, after I won my first gold medal. And I was standing there. My parents were really proud of me. And every time these kids would tease me, and I was like, yeah, well, when's the last time you were on the front page of the newspaper,
I love that. I love that. It's such there's such an important lesson in that like in life, sometimes things just are scary, right? If it's because you're being bullied, or if it's because you're going to move to a new state and you don't know anybody, whatever it is, things can be scary. And if we hold ourselves back from what makes us happy because of a fear, we don't get to live our best lives. And
Yeah.
you obviously have this like natural strength in you, because most children would not respond that way. I'm so glad that you were given that opportunity to be true to yourself. Like that's
Yeah,
so important.
absolutely. And that's the strength I get from my mom. My mom always just said, if you like something, go for it, and so I did. Then I got more confident about, okay, this is my truth. This is really who I am. I need to start telling the people that I care about and the people that I love.
I think it's a really important lesson for all of our listeners, even if you don't have that family support, that you need to do the thing that makes you happy. You need to
Yes.
fight for yourself, stand up for yourself. You'll
Yeah.
get through the hard place. You will get through it.
Mhm.
And it's
Mhm.
going to be okay.
Yeah.
It's just, but you're going to face criticism. I have to ask you this
Yeah.
because clearly you lived outside of the box and you were doing figure skating. And like,
Mhm.
I mean, even your roommate was like, you must be gay, right? But like, it was fine. Did your parents not know?
Well, that's the kicker of it. I just think it wasn't a part of their thought process,
Yeah.
that this just wasn't a thing, and there wasn't a lot of visibility. And so I think it was just kind of an out of sight, out of mind thing. As long as I didn't say it, it wasn't true. My mom didn't know, it was kind of like, I've been in sequins my whole life. Like, how is this news? So, but I had to say it out loud, and I had to tell them the truth, right? My mom came over to my apartment, and we sat there and had our coffee, and and I said, Mom, I have something to tell you. And she goes, okay. I said, well, I'm gay. And she just kind of didn't say anything for a few minutes. And she just broke down into tears. And, and for her in that moment, it was all of this information just coming at her at once. Later on, I realized that I had to give her some space to come to terms with her thoughts on what gay people were. This was, the internet was still pretty new at the time. It was, and I don't even think my parents had internet. They didn't have internet for a really long time. They're kind of old school.
Well, and they
So
grew up in a generation, right? That
yeah,
like this
right.
wasn't something people came out and said. Like
Yeah,
obviously there were
absolutely.
people that were gay, but it was
Yeah,
not openly communicated.
they had roommates. She called me and said, "This is stupid. I'm coming over." And so she came over to my apartment, and again, we broke down into tears. And she just said, I just always pictured this wedding and grandkids.
Oh.
And I was crying with her. And I said, Mom, you're still going to have that. It's just going to look different. She said, son, I'm not going to lose you over this. You're my baby, and I will try to figure it out, and I'll do what I can. We didn't have, DVRs back then, so I'd go to her house to watch Will and Grace, and that's really how we bonded, my mom and I. Will and Grace was able to help my mom see gay folks in a positive light, and we would laugh at Jack and Karen, and so that show really helped us bond. Visibility is so important to see families like ours, to see that we're just regular people trying to live the day-to-day life, right? That this isn't this big scary thing that we're doing. It's just who we are as
Like
people.
there's so
Yeah.
much on TV. It's more and more all the time. And they're having like transgender roles in movies and TV shows.
Yeah.
And I think it's so good, especially like you grew up in a generation where you didn't get to see you on TV.
Right.
And now kids today that are struggling with what you were struggling with at that point do get to see themselves. And I think it gives them a sense of hope, even if they don't have a supportive family,
Sure.
that
Mhm.
you can make your own family,
Yeah.
and that message is so important, right?
Yes.
I agree. It's so nice that you were able to have that. And what a great show, by the way,
Yes.
to like have
Yes.
that too. Like,
Yes. I think my dad had some coaching before I talked to him. He was pretty much the last person I told. And keep in mind that my dad's a very blue collar, manly man. He is a mechanic working on cars. So he was actually out in the garage working on a car when I told him. And I went out to the garage and I just said, Dad, I have something to tell you. And he was, like under the hood of the car wrenching however he does. And he kind of stopped and looked up at me and he's like, yeah, go ahead. And I said, well, I'm gay. And he goes, well, are you happy? And I said,
oh,
I'm happier than I've ever been in my life. I finally get to tell my truth. And he just said, that's all I ever wanted for you, son. And he just went back to working on a car.
I
So,
have goosebumps. I swear that's the best. I can totally picture like this like rough and tough
yeah.
dad like under the hood of the car being like, and like I can't imagine, but if that was me, like I would have been terrified. I would have been
Yeah.
like, oh,
Yeah.
he
Oh,
looks
I
so
was shaking. I was sweating. My hands were clammy. And then it was just like, oh, we're not even going to argue or anything.
like you're not gonna be like, why? Like not a
Yeah.
single like you're
It
just
was
like,
not this
are you
like,
happy?
oh, yeah, right.
What a perfect response as a parent.
Yeah, and even though I had love and support from my family, I knew I didn't belong in that town. And as much support that I had, they couldn't stop the hate that was being directed at me. Even after high school, I would still walk down the street and people would call me a fag. And I finally got my last straw. Was I went to a bar. My aunt and uncle own a bar in my hometown, so I went down there to go have a drink and chat with them and chat with some girlfriends. And this guy taps me on the shoulder and says, "Hey, are you gay?" And I just kind of like looked at him in my skin tight shirt and bleached tips and was like, yeah, of course I am. And he just looked at me with this look of disgust and he hocked a loogie and spit it right in my face. And I just remember like this spit on my face, and there was all this chaos, and he got kicked out and barred from the bar. But even though I was in a safe space, I was in a place where my family owned this place, I was with my girlfriends, it still didn't stop. At 25, I packed 2 suitcases and I had $200 in my pocket, and I got on a train and moved out to the West Coast. And so that's when life really started taking off for me. And I got really involved in the LGBTQ community. I went back to and I ended up going back to college and earning a degree after I was able to find that place where I could feel safe and comfortable.
Absolutely. I think feeling safe and comfortable is so incredibly important. And there's probably so many people that live in a small town like that and are the you that you back then.
Sure.
And
Hmm.
it's so important to know that you're not trapped there.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
when you reach a
Hmm.
certain age, it's not easy. Moving is scary, right?
No.
Change is
Yeah.
scary, but it's not bad. Like you get to
Hmm.
find yourself and find
Yeah.
joy. So you found home and a
Hmm.
husband.
And a husband.
That's a double win, right?
Yeah.
Move to a new town, you're like, this one's it. I love it here. And
Yep.
then you meet your husband.
I mean, obviously, the best first date I ever had. It led into our marriage. But we went into this first date. I went into this first date with a take it or leave it attitude.
But I do want to dive into that. Like you're saying, you threw everything out there on a first
Hmm.
date. As a
Hmm.
woman, if I did that, like the amount of like, that chick's crazy I would
Yeah.
get, like, just so you know, nice to meet you. I want to get married and
Sure.
I have children. And they'd be like, and that's such a typical thing for people to
Yeah.
say, right? Like, is like, whoa, 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 like you're moving too fast for me.
Hmm.
But I think, to some extent, you get to a point where you're sick of the bullshit and you
Yep.
want something real. And,
Yes.
from what I understand, is especially in the male community, being gay comes with a very sexual driven environment. It's a culture
Yep.
based around sex.
Hmm.
I know there's a lot of cheating. There's all these like dynamics to it. And I mean, how do you feel about that? Do you think that's one reason that you were like, listen, like I'm done with this and I want this for real?
Yes, absolutely. In my opinion, gay hookup culture stems from our childhood and basically rites of passages that we experience in middle school and high school. You know, and most of the time when I speak of the LGBTQ community, I try to lump be inclusive when I speak, but in this moment I have to speak from a gay man's experience.
Yeah.
So a lot of us gay kids, we don't get those rites of passage that a lot of our peers get. We don't start out in innocent relationships in middle school. We're not dancing with our crush at arm's length, or we don't hold hands innocently at a football game. When you're thrown into a world of attractive men dancing in their underwear on a box, I was one of those guys once. And you add alcohol to the mix, it's a perfect recipe for exploring the sex and sexuality. And so so hookup culture is a big thing in our world, and you can find what you're looking for outside of a bar. And easy for me to say because I met my husband in a bar.
Yeah, that's true.
But again, and I was just at a very at a point where I was just done with this hookup culture, and I wanted something real and I wanted something genuine. You have to know yourself and you have to love yourself. Because you can't expect if you don't love yourself, how can you expect somebody to love you, right?
That's true no matter if you're gay or straight.
Right.
Like
In general. Yep.
and so many younger people don't quite understand that, right? Like it's
Yep.
such an important lesson for the younger listeners, like I mean 20s even, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the
Hmm.
time that you're figuring out who you are. You need to
Yes.
know what's important to you before
Yep.
you can really have somebody else value you.
Right. Do you want to get married? Do you want to have kids? And have those questions figured out before you find a lifelong partner. Because if they don't align with those goals, then
Then you're
you know,
wasting your
then you're
time.
wasting your time,
I
right?
mean, have a good night if that's what you're after.
Thanks for the dinner.
Yeah. And maybe breakfast.
Right. Exactly. And when it comes to a partner, it's about the destination, not the journey, right?
Oh, I
and,
like
and
that.
it's kind of a little bit of both for James and I. And then we were married for a year before we started the process of starting our family. So we did get to have our honeymoon and be married for a year before we started that family planning.
So let's talk about that. This
Mhm.
family planning. What did that look like for you guys?
We looked at every avenue we could think of. We first looked at surrogacy because who wouldn't love a little Bobby and a little James running around, right? And sometimes with infant adoption, the biological mother has a chance to change their mind. And just seeing the stories of these kids that are just needing a home and just needing love and just needing support, that really got to my heart, and that's how we got into a foster to adopt situation. Everything aligned in our favor that they were ready to find an adoptive home, and we could provide that for them. So my son's foster mom brought both of them to a restaurant and to meet them. And I was more nervous that day than my wedding day. I think I was more nervous that day than any other day in my life. They moved in with us on December 2nd, 2016, and we adopted them on May 25th, 2018. My mom was so excited to be a grandma again. My brother had already had a child, but she was so excited to be a grandma again. And she passed away 1 month after I became a dad. And it was the most heartbreaking, earth shattering thing that I had ever experienced. And here I am trying to parent these two children while I lost a parent. So even that first year was me parenting these kids, but also parenting through grief, which was incredibly hard. And sometimes people will look at James and I or me, and they'll say, "Oh man, those kids are so lucky. You saved them." And I I'm always a bit taken aback because in a way they saved me. She wasn't sick. It was a really tragic accident. She died of carbon monoxide poisoning. I had to get up every morning thinking, what would my mom want me to do right now? Would she want me to lay in bed and cry, or get up and be the dad that she knows I can be?
You're super excited. Was she like planning to come out and see you soon?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
there's I'm gonna cry. And
I
it's
might too.
okay. It's okay to do. But like, I mean, I'm very close with
He's
my
actually right
mom.
here with me.
Oh, I love that. Like I'm very close with my mom, right? And I'm a
Mhm.
mom. I have 3 kids. So I mean, still to this day, there's times I call my mom because I want to complain about something my kids were doing that was driving me crazy, or like, oh my gosh, my kid's fever won't go down and I can't remember how far apart can I give them Motrin and ibuprofen, like when they were little and I was new at all this, right? And calling my mom, having that ability is, I definitely am not going to take it for granted.
Yeah,
Um
yeah. Please don't.
I
Yeah, and I always shopped with my daughter because she was so young, and she just grab my face and she'd be like, "Oh, it's gonna be okay, Daddy." And I said, "I know, I just miss Grandma." And she goes, "I know, I miss her too." Even though she never met her, she
oh,
was
I
a very
love it.
large
That's
part
so
of her.
sweet.
Yes, and so and so they got to see that it's okay to cry too, and they got to see me go through all of these emotions and having these emotions that are okay.
You know what I really love about that is not just did they get to see their parent have emotions, but
Mhm.
they got to see that it's okay for a man to cry, for a man
Yeah,
to have feelings.
yeah.
And I
Mhm.
feel like that's a lesson that society has really screwed up for men.
And it was about how 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 I dealt with it that made all the difference, and I went into grief therapy, and I just dove into grief as much as I can, and I learned a lot about myself in that process as well. So
You know, the key thing I think you said there is like you allowed yourself to grieve, and
yeah,
that you worked through it,
yeah.
right? Because it is our choice when things happen in life that are bad and hard. It is our choice, even if it's a really hard one to make, how we come out of it,
Yeah.
and it can go either way.
Yeah, you can take it to a really dark place. And again, if I wouldn't have had my kids at the time, I could have taken it to a really dark
Right?
place. I didn't want to get out of bed. I was completely shattered.
Yeah.
Each and every time we go out to dinner as a family, we like to go to our sit down restaurant or whatever. Every single time, the server asks how we want our check split. And I wonder, does that ever happen to you when you're out with your family?
Absolutely never. I
Yeah,
don't that happens if I go out to lunch with a girlfriend. Now that
right.
you say that, I've never
Yeah,
even thought about that perspective.
yeah.
That's so
So I
interesting.
employ some techniques to establish that I am the dad. I order for the kids, and then I'll say my husband will have a soda. So I'm really
Yeah.
like establishing that from the get go. But do any other families have to do that?
No, and nor should you, right? It's like it's so
Right, and nor
interesting
should
that
I.
your family hasn't had direct like hate towards you.
Mhm,
But let's be real. There are so many people, like especially like I mean, you're on social media
mhm,
and you're publicly this family that's two men with your adopted children and it is what it is. I'm sure that like people say stuff all the time like, oh, gay people shouldn't have children because
mhm,
kids need to have a mom and a dad. That goes to like a lesbian couple, that goes to a gay couple. They also say stuff like, oh, they're going to turn them gay. I mean,
mhm,
these are things
mhm.
we hear,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, I hear it all the time. I mean, being on social media and throwing our family out there, it does open us up to a lot of ignorant comments, and we get the hateful one every now and then. Kids need a mom and dad, and the answer to that is kids just need
Yeah,
love.
I would think when your son like had his first sleepover at your house, were you concerned at all about the way the parents would respond? Like, oh, I don't know, you're a boy and you're going to their house and they have two dads. Like, did you worry that somebody would be ignorant and say something like that?
Worried about it, sure. Had it ever happened? No.
Well, I think it's so good it didn't
but
happen, but you know why
yeah,
it
but
probably doesn't.
internalizing that.
Right. Right. You
Mhm.
probably did it to
Yeah.
yourself
Yeah.
to some extent.
Mhm. Mhm.
And because that's what society has taught you to do.
Sure.
Right.
Mhm.
And that's
Mhm.
so normal. But what's interesting about that is I bet you a big part of why you haven't had to experience that is because you're like, this is our family. This is what it is. And you're not afraid to be loud. Right. And
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
feel like
Mhm.
if you were more like afraid to have conversations with the other parents and interact because you were worried about judgment and you
Mhm.
had created an environment where you were more introverted towards the other
Mhm.
people,
Mhm.
they probably would question things more,
Sure. Yeah,
right?
and
Because
maybe they would. They don't have anything to do with my life. You can say all the hateful things you want to me, but I still have my family. I still have my kids. I still have my marriage. Like you can't take that away from me. So
even if you weren't brought up in an environment with all that love around you saying you can do anything you want to do, that doesn't mean you can't love yourself and value yourself. It's going to be harder for you because you have to do it for yourself and like a lot of times you feel conceited in that
sure.
journey of self-love, right?
Yeah.
Like when you're trying to
Mhm.
find yourself, it's
Mhm.
like, oh, but if I say I'm proud of myself for this or I like that about myself, that means I'm like hiding myself up and like that's not what, I don't want to do that.
No,
It's like
no, do
bullshit.
that,
Do
do that,
it.
do
Yeah.
that. You are awesome. I am awesome, and I try to remind myself of that every day. But you're right. In society, we can't brag about ourselves too much. And it's like, why
No.
not? This is amazing. I think that's really important to remember when it comes to confidence and building yourself up is that you're the one that matters to you. Your people that you care about are the ones that matter to you. All these other people are just worrying about what you're thinking about them.
So true. Like, how do you talk to your daughter about being this young, strong, empowered woman?
Every single woman that I know has been sexually harassed in one way or another, whether it's physical, emotional, this or that, whatever it
Yeah.
is. I've been there for those conversations. I've been there when they were called a bitch because they didn't give a man the time of day. And so I've got to see firsthand how women are treated in society. It was really important to me to teach her how to handle those situations. And what one video that came across the female empowerment where we did a video with AOC, Alexandria Ocasio Cortez.
Representative Yoho put his finger in my face He called me disgusting. He called me crazy. He called me out of my mind. He called me dangerous. Representative Yoho called me, and I quote, a fucking bitch. I am here because I have to show my parents that I am their daughter and that they did not raise me to accept abuse from men.
And that kind of went viral, and it was very true. I saw that video and we watched it together, and I just looked at my daughter and I said, don't let anyone speak to you like that. Don't let anyone talk to you like that. People are going to, and unfortunately people are going to talk to you like that. But I want you to have the confidence to know how to deal with it in that situation. I want you to be a little AOC and call that MFer out.
Yeah.
Don't talk to me like that, you know? Um, and so raising her with that confidence and empowerment and telling her she's beautiful, but having her understand that she's beautiful inside and out. A foster kid knows that their life can be uprooted at any moment. And sometimes in the middle of the night, and their things are thrown into trash bags and they're moved to a different home. So they're always on this guard. And and the moment that it happened for my kids, I'm getting choked up now because I'm remembering it. You know, and it happened at different times for them. But that very first "I love you" was so monumental to me.
Bobby, it has been so great to talk to you today. I'm so glad you decided to come on the podcast with me. Thank you so much.
This has been an absolute honor and privilege to be able to talk to you today. So I look forward to seeing it when it comes out. And I'm absolutely honored that you reached out to me. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate you sharing your letting us into your home with your family and
Yeah.
letting people see what the real world is like for a minute.